how did this wonderful human, this lady, come into y'all's world? Was it through her business or busing? Was that your first awareness of it, or was there another caveat to the story?
Yeah, I would say it was. Zara Katz and I are both journalists. I'm an investigative reporter, and she's a visual producer and photo editor. And in 2014, we are good friends. And in 2014, we were talking about our respective work, mine reporting on criminal justice issues, and hers working in the photo world. And she said, I get so much of my information through photography, and at the time, which was a different time, there was so little photography about incarceration, because there's a lot of limitations on taking pictures in those spaces. And so we started an Instagram feed called Everyday Incarceration that she tapped her whole photo world, and it tapped my knowledge of criminal justice, and we basically created an archive about that aggregated the photography of 40 years of mass incarceration. What did it look like? And in the course of doing that, we started talking again, and I said, one story that is missing is the story that Zara is often really interested in, which is the women's side. Not just women who are incarcerated, but the many women who support people who are behind bars. And they were very often my sources on stories. You can't call into a prison, they can only call out. So the people who hold a lot of the information about what's going on inside are the relatives, the sisters, the mothers, the girlfriends. And so we decided we wanted to do something around that. And we were very privileged to have an opportunity to work with the Magnum Foundation, which is a photo foundation. And we proposed a project about women with incarcerated loved ones. We started talking to people, and Crystal, her business, Bridging the Gap, followed Everyday Incarceration. We followed her, and thanks to a photographer that we had worked with, we showed up at a picnic one day, a big cookout in Philadelphia in a park, and immediately Crystal, in her warm way, was sort of like, you need to talk to this woman, she has a story, she has a story, she has a story. And eventually she said, you need to ride the van. So we rode the van, and we did a photo project in collaboration with the Magnum Foundation and with Crystal's Riders that we called Women on the Outside. And there was a small exhibition video that was a dawn to dusk ride on the van, and that is the opening to our film. We kept shooting for 6 more years, not knowing really what we were doing until we got pretty deep into it.
Not knowing what you're doing, you've obviously been familiar with your past. Was that then, some people may not have lasted, you know what I mean? Some people may not have been able to understand it's going to take the time to be patient to get this story. How important was that to not only getting Crystal to let y'all in so much that you are, but also when the circumstance changes in the film, there's an openness that's still there that could have been shut down, I think, if Crystal, her life is going to change because of what's going on, maybe a push out from you guys. I'd love to know that cultivation of that relationship, because it does feel like a very small group of people connected. It just doesn't feel like a massive movie.
Right.
And that's a beautiful, important, I think, part of it.
I think it really, I've thought about it over time, talking about the film. I think we benefited from the fact that none of us knew what we were doing, and we really all learned together. Zara and I are established journalists, but making a documentary is a very different thing. It's very deeply intimate. It has a really long period. I mean, even a short doc takes a year often, And I think we are all about the same age. We're a few years older than Crystal. We were all women who were college educated and talking about our relationships and talking about family. And there is a way in which we formed a collective bond, and she taught us and we taught her. She is incredibly observant. So as we learned more about shooting, we really were not cinematographers before we shot the whole thing. She learned from us, and then she would be like, oh, this, that, the other, and she has a very vibrant social media presence. So like that was a collective. And I think that made a big difference. I think that we knew each other beforehand. We had worked together. She had seen the product of what we had done previously. When we had the photo exhibition, she drove a whole van full of writers to come to Brooklyn. We all went to Germany together because the exhibition showed in Germany. So we had a relationship. But it was still different when it turned and the project became not about her writers, but about her. Mm-hmm. And I think there were moments where she was over it, but she also always had a sense that she wanted the story told. And so there are moments in the film that may or may not be obvious, but that Crystal shot. Like, she took the footage. Sometimes you know that, and sometimes maybe you don't. But she would call us. I mean, there was one day where we had just left, and I got a call at 7 o'clock in the morning, and she's like, come back down, this thing happened. And it's a very pivotal moment in the film, and the only reason I was there was because she woke me up in the morning and said, I think it's time to come back. So I really think it became a collaborative effort. And very, very towards the end of the film, I was having a lot of doubts, like, should we be doing this story? I asked her, like, we were on camera, and I said, Crystal, I have my doubts because I'm worried that we're going to memorialize the worst moments of your life and you're going to have to live with those forever. And she just said, this is our doc and this is a story that needs to be told. And that was really meaningful to me. So I really think our names are on it, and her name is on, parts of it too, but it was a team effort.
You brought up her social media. Can we talk a bit about word of mouth, getting the voice out there, getting people heard? I know this is still a film that needs to get out into a larger audience, hopefully soon. But like docs like 13th or 13 and a half, Ava DuVernay's beautiful doc on the impact of incarceration.
13.
There is a knowledge for some people about certain things, and then there's just a complete not understanding of the situation. Mm-hmm. This is a documentary that shines a light, I don't think people realize, on a subject that is so vibrant and so much out there. How important is getting this story out there, not just for looking at Crystal's life and her story and all the writers, but on a bigger scale, that our country's battling with incarcerated people and will for the eternity as long as we continue to just throw people in jail. I feel like this is a film that needs a long life.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Like, as a journalist, is that the notion of what you guys are trying to capture? Is that the hope?
I think we wanted to tell. I have reported for many years on incarceration issues, on the issue of mass incarceration, on sort of, in a prismatic way, every facet of this issue. But I think what we were interested in this was the way in which it radiates outwards and shapes the lives of women and people who go far beyond the people that someone thinks might be affected by incarceration. As you meet Crystal, you understand she's a successful businesswoman. She went to college. You see her be lauded, and this is what's going on in the background. And there are very few studies. There are studies about children. 10 million children have had a parent incarcerated at some point in their life. But there are not a lot of numbers about the women who often hold down a family. Mm-hmm. There's one study that has 1 in 4 women have known a close person incarcerated, whether in jail or prison. And that is a large number of people in this country, And so I think as much as we want people who are not aware of this issue to come to the film and learn. We tried to make it for those 1 in 4 women. We tried to make it for the people who haven't seen the complexity of that experience represented, more than we tried to make it for the people who had no idea. And so there's things that aren't explained. We don't use statistics. It is about a person's story. But I also think that there's a lot of entry points into her story. I've had conversations with parents who have recognized what it's like to just be at the end of your rope and still be raising a child, in her relationship with Nave. People have responded to their relationships with their fathers who were not incarcerated, but maybe were sort of absent in some way. So I think we tried to make a film with a lot of entry points. But yes, we want people to consider what it is to live in a country that that very often takes people out of their family and then sort of drops them back in without much help.
Story set in Philly. Mm-hmm. You can hear Philly and Crystal. That's an obvious. Yeah. But there were times I was watching where I didn't think I'm in Philly. I could be anywhere. Mm-hmm. You guys do a wonderful job of not necessarily like, I mean, there are certain shots you're like, I can see Philly, but it's not like Rocky running up the step. You know what I mean? Right. Like, it's not a short about Philadelphia, and yet that's so part of it. But the universality of this doc, since you guys were first-time cinematographers, how did y'all decide to make it more intimate, more grounded visually, not just following Crystal, but all the little different elements of it? It's I feel like it could be, anyone could think it's anywhere if you don't listen to Crystal's voice or anything like that.
Yeah. I mean, this was a very iterative, intimate story, and not to be sort of reductive, but I think women's stories are often a little bit more domestic or intimate, and maybe the film reflects that. Like, a lot of life happens in the home. Mm-hmm. You know, she's caring for Nave, or a lot of life happens in the van between, you know, for a period of Crystal's life, a lot of it was spent either in home or in the van, or, you know, she was a social worker and drove from place to place. We couldn't always go inside those places, but it was inherently a life because of what she did between driving the van, being a social worker, entering other people's homes. It was an inherently sort of domestic story. There are very much facets of Crystal's life we did not capture, and you see snippets of it, you know, built out of her social media. Like, we did not get on a plane and go somewhere with her. We just simply did not have the budget. But I think some of that is just reflected in the phase in her life that she was in, and a lot of your life is sort of lived in between spaces, like in between homes. And so I think that is, I think it's a sort of, when we were editing, we're like, we only have stuff. We have so much stuff in our house and in the car. And our editor was so mad. She's like, not another car scene. And I was like, we need this as a transition. Like, we're going to the car. But I think that it's actually reflective of a lot of people's lives. You know, we spent, especially at the pandemic, we spend a lot of time like in the home and in the car. And I think it's sort of a nice, it sort of happened that way, but in that way it becomes transferable to a lot of people's lives. And so, yeah, as cinematographers, as storytellers, you sort of want to be out in the world and doing everything. And some of it was our own limitations at moments, like early on, we were sort of like, can we film here? What is that logistical process? But I think it ended up being an intimate film as a result of that, in a way that hopefully works pretty well.
Yeah, it does. It connects, definitely. I want to go meet Crystal. And
she usually comes. She's not here, but...
Let's talk about Bentonville, being able to be accepted here, knowing that what Gina and Wendy and the Gina's Foundation have championed kind of gets a little bit to obviously what your film is talking about, the showcasing of women. There's not enough of that. But what does it mean to be at a festival that highlights women filmmakers and diversity, and also hopefully change? I mean, we're right now in a very weird state today in particular about change. But this festival champions the ability to have choices and have a diverse view of that. Why Bentonville?
A friend who was in Bentonville last year told us to apply, and we're first-time filmmakers. You know, you also learn about the whole landscape of where you get it out. And I was so thrilled when we got in. One of the first prisons I ever went to was in Arkansas. And it's a state that I think encapsulates all of the United States. Like, you can go in this state and you see every facet of our complex country. And so to be accepted into this festival that highlights women storytellers is really meaningful. We worked really hard to have an all-female team. We worked really hard to have a diverse team. Crystal's a Black woman. Zara and I are white women. And we knew from the get that we had to make sure that our team reflected the story that we wanted to tell. So when our producer Kiera C. Jones came on, who is an established narrative and documentary filmmaker, she's a Black woman, she's from Florida, she has lived this experience and also operated in film worlds that we had not. We knew we were adding just a really crucial voice to the film, and she's a producer and writer. And then our editor, Susanna Herbert, is a woman who has told stories about race in the American South and continues to do so. And it was basically the four of us and Crystal that made this film. We had a number of other editors over the years who were Black women, you know, Paige Polk, Ariel Knight, who each brought their own vision to our footage and helped us see our own story differently. And I think to get into Bentonville after we so firmly tried to build a team that reflects the ethos of Bentonville is really meaningful. And to screen here and to be with this like really beautiful, impressive group of filmmakers. I mean, I am humbled to be in these spaces all the time. This is not the place that I expected to be, just being a journalist and not having come up as a filmmaker. And I think the fact that the team here and, you know, Gina Davis leading the way, it is opening up spaces for the kind of stories that I hope to see. And I hope the distribution side of the industry starts doing the same thing.
We can only hope and pray. Yeah. I think that's Gina's fight. Yeah. Commercial. I've got to ask, as far as the title, it obviously resonates for Crystal's story, but I love how it's a very open title, and it could be perceived very differently if you don't know the story.
Yeah.
Was that always the title? Did you have any other versions, or when you found it, were you like, aha, this makes sense?
We struggled, actually. The project started as Women on the Outside, and that, and then it became more about Crystal, and then it was Woman on the Outside, and then it became A Woman on the Outside. I still almost wonder if it's the right, people have had different opinions, but it was sort of an outgrowth in the same way that the project was, from this iteration to that iteration, forward. And I think it's a little bit nebulous, maybe, unless you've had the experience, and I think maybe it's more clear. Because, if you've been a woman on the outside, you know what that means. But yeah, I have doubted every facet of the project. I have doubted the title, but we keep coming back to it, and I think it ends up working. And I think we recently had another screening, and there were a number of people who got up after and told their own stories. And I felt like, okay, we're back to the women on the outside, we're back to the collective of people who have experienced this. So
it's a group we shouldn't have, but now that we have it, we need it type thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think with many experiences, it's hard unless what we hope to do with the film, what we hope the film does is spark a dialogue where people are willing to talk about their experiences. It's often very stigmatized. Or you just simply don't share this facet of your life, even though it's happening in the background. And I think if the women on the outside, for lack of a better title, for lack of a better category, I think when women talk to each other, it does one emotional job, and when women collectivize, it can change things. As you say, this is the day that Roe v. Wade was overturned. I think we're going to be seeing women collectivize because we have to, and I think women on the outside have always collectivized because they have to, and they will continue to do so in an era of the United States where I think women getting together and doing some shit is going to continue to be really important.
Well, Gina's about to do some shit later tonight by speaking, so it'll be very interesting to be where we are in this weird time.
Yeah.
Lisa, I'd love to know, as a writer, as a filmmaker now, how this project has changed you, molded you, and what are your goals now after doing something like this that is so intimate, personal, connective? How has it made you a better writer and hopefully a future filmmaker of many more works?
I think this film has utterly changed my life. I think I don't take it lightly that a family lets you into their world. I don't take it lightly that a black family in Philadelphia let two white filmmakers into their world. And I think of that as precious, and I learn so much from them and continue to. It has changed the notion of what family is to me. It has changed Crystal's complex but utterly clear devotion to what it means to be there for family, what your obligation is to save one boy in your life. It is just something that I don't think a lot of people would do, and she did it so lightly. She did it with utter confidence, and Nave is 17 years old now, and he is a really special kid, and I got to watch him grow up, and I don't take that lightly either. I think it has changed my notion of what filmmaking can and should be. I am thinking a lot about the role that we have as filmmakers to work together, to collectivize, to share information, to champion each other's stories. And as a reporter, it has changed. I'm an investigative reporter. I have dealt in the fair and balanced and objective space for a really long time, and I continue to believe in that. But I also really believe in collective storytelling in a way I didn't before. And what it means to tell stories with people, what it means to listen deeply and be humbled and learn. And I don't think I would be the same person today if not for having done this film.
Lisa, thank you for tackling this crazy subject and giving it the time you needed to do it. And thank you for bringing it to Bentonville. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me and us.